Welcome, everybody. We're here to take note of the fact that journalism is alive and well and feisty, especially at the New York Times.
Page one inside the New York Times is a look at what's happening in the world of journalism, and specifically newspapers, at a moment of great upheaval. And it's looking at that problem through the sort of keyhole of the media desk at the New York Times, where writers are day in and day out covering the business of media.
The old newspaper model is dying.
It's this kind of collision of two worlds, and this new world that just kind of wants to crack it all open.
And through the stories that they're reporting, telling us a little bit about how it's evolving, while their own newspaper is going through layoffs, attempts to reconfigure themselves for different platforms like Twitter, and really trying to evolve along with the rest of the media business.
We are the New York Times, and we are dictating terms.
David Carr is the media equation columnist at the New York Times who figures very prominently in page one.
For those of us who work in media, life is a drumbeat of goodbye speeches with sheet cakes and cheap sparkling wine. That carnage has left behind an island of misfit toys, like model trains whose cabooses have square wheels.
And he's actually a writer originally from Minneapolis who has suffered with drug addiction, actually been incarcerated at one point.
Sure, I've been fired in my day, but always after I failed to show up at work like a normal person. Go to treatment, my editor at the magazine in Minneapolis would tell me, there's a bed waiting for you. But at the tender age of 31, I still had a year left before hitting rock bottom. A year left of being that guy, the violent, drug-snorting thug.
David Carr has just gone through like an incredible journey, personal journey, as well as someone who's fashioned a very interesting and I think insightful perspective on the business of media. So David sort of becomes in the film somebody who is on the front lines reporting on what's going on, but also somebody who is able to respond to the Times critics.
We're hearing that layoffs are beginning today. We now know how many people have opted to go voluntarily, which means we know how many people we have to lay off.
I wanted to make this film because at the time there was so much doom and gloom about the newspaper business and about journalism in general, and I think a sense maybe of people taking for granted the kind of work that goes into original reporting, breaking news, investigative reporting. And I felt that almost as a devil's advocate, I wanted to explore whether the enthusiasm about new media was forgetting certain things that old media does.
I still can't get over the feeling that Brian Stelter was a robot assembled in the basement of the New York Times to come and destroy me.
In the debate about what is the place for old media in a new world, I think Brian Stelter really emerges as a very interesting case study of somebody who comes from the blogosphere.
New York Times, probably the only known journalist to create a blog and then go to print media.
Here was this kid, 21-year-old Brian Stelter, who started a blog, who did it anonymously so no one would out him until the New York Times outed him as a mere kid. He made his brand and his reputation by just getting out there and blogging.
So Brian and David are sort of like these two poles of old and new people in the world of journalism, but they're both sort of, you know, rocking out in both landscapes in different ways, and I think that's a great example of what the future is going to bring.
The Times still, I think to a remarkable degree, does set the agenda.
There needs to be an economic model that we figure out for those places to do the work that they do. Readers first need to understand the importance of that work and to realize that it doesn't just emerge from the internet or from anywhere else for free. It's something that requires a certain mandate.
So this is about WikiLeaks, which is a website. They didn't have to drop this off on the front step of NBC News or the New York Times. They just dropped it off on YouTube and waited for everybody else to find it.
One of the things that page one presents is the WikiLeaks story. It's the investigative work that is going on, whether it be the Times or the Guardian or El País or Der Spiegel. The point is to understand that you need people trained in going through that kind of information, producing stories that are digestible In the film, what we try and do is present different models, letting those sort of exist without deciding which is better, which is going to work, and mainly letting people see what the value is of the work that ProPublica does or the New York Times does. And I think that we can sort of work backwards from a sense of this is where we want to get to, this is what we believe is important, and we will figure out sort of as a community and as a set of different businesses, you know, what are the mechanics of getting there. I definitely feel a tremendous optimism because I think that part of the sort of tools of the insurgency, the revolution that's happening with technology and social media has given us incredible tools, and those are ones that people are employing every day to create incredible stories. I really did see this film as an investigative process, going through all of the arguments and trying to organize them in an arc that is somewhat cinematic, where we sort of go on a ride. The viewer is able to, you know, understand all these ideas in a very human way because we're trying to figure out how they connect, but also it's about the media specifically, so at the end of it, you come up with a story that really tells you about the state of media, in addition to specifically what's happening with the New York Times. In making Page One, I discovered a renewed sense of appreciation for what traditional journalism is all about.